This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 915 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, sponsored by Underdog Fantasy. Thanks for tuning in. Before we get into the trends this week, I want to remind you to check out Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is just a great place to play fantasy sports. There's so many different offerings that'll definitely fit what you're looking for. Right now, if you sign up on Underdog, you'll get a nice deposit offer, a free pick that'll help you win some cash, and then also my rest of season rankings. Those rest of season rankings are updated every Tuesday through the end of the season. You get access to all of those updates. Make sure you take advantage of those offers by heading to UnderdogFantasy.com and signing up. When you do, use promo code LATEROUND. That's promo code LATEROUND. It feels like we have to start this week with Mark Andrews. He didn't do anything in week 3. And by didn't do anything, I mean that he saw one target and he did not catch that target. He ran a route on just 35% of Lamar Jackson's dropbacks. In weeks 1 and 2, as we know, that route participation was down about 10 percentage points year over year. That was a bad sign, but it wasn't a death sentence. Going to a 35% route participation is absurd. Like, that's really, really bad. The only time that Andrews has been that low, basically across his entire career, has been when he's been hurt. Now, John Harbaugh came out and basically said that things will change week by week with this offense. And we can sit here and say, oh, we saw all of this coming because of his week 1 usage. But what we saw in week 3 was legitimately nothing like week 1. I would take week 1 usage for Mark Andrews over week 3 usage all day long. You have to at least wonder if there's more going on with Mark Andrews, whether it's the tightrope surgery and recovery or the car accident stuff that happened in August. What we do know is that the only reason he's in our starting lineup is because the rest of the tight end position is absolute trash too. A topic that was brought up on the show recently had to do with Terry McLaurin and this Commanders offense. I mentioned on last week's mailbag episode how McLaurin's big problem was he just wasn't connecting on his downfield throws, or I guess his downfield targets. He had 4 of them that had traveled 10 or more yards. That was good for 100 intended air yards. He caught just 1 of them through 2 games for 12 yards. His average at the target had been lower year over year by about 3 yards. But in week 3, the Commanders opened things up more. Jaden Daniels had an average at the target of 9.7, by far a season high. And Terry McLaurin finally converted. It's no coincidence. McLaurin's peripherals were actually pretty wild in week 3. He saw an average at the target of almost 26 yards, but he also still had a 26% target share. It could be the turning point that we needed to see for McLaurin and this offense. And by the way, Jaden Daniels, super legit. Rashod Rice is a good football player. We can all see that. My year 2 model saw that. But we can recognize that while also recognizing that this situation has become a perfect storm for him as a player. Patrick Mahomes currently ranks second to last in 20-plus air yard rate. He's dead last in his percentage of attempts that travel 15 or more air yards. That's among relevant starters across the league. That helps out a guy like Rashod Rice. He's been a lower ADOT, higher yards after the catch player in the NFL thus far. Rice has a 5.2 ADOT this year. That ranks 83rd out of 89 wide receivers who have run 50 or more routes. He played that role last year too. And it's a great role for fantasy purposes. Rice is an easy top 10 wide receiver for me rest of season. But how we're getting to these numbers, strongly due to 2 high safety looks, it's pretty interesting given how Patrick Mahomes started his career. I always talk about team pass to rush touchdown ratio on this show as the season goes on, because it's an easy way to spot regression. Team pass to rush touchdown ratio is just team passing touchdowns versus team rushing touchdowns. The percentage of team touchdowns that came via the pass. Right now, Denver is lowest in the league with a 0% passing touchdown rate because they haven't thrown a touchdown yet. And then Minnesota, who's historically been a little bit higher under this metric with Kevin O'Connell, they're first at an 89% rate. That's reflected in Sam Darnold's touchdown rate, which is above 10%. Expect those teams to meet more in the middle, to regress as the season moves on. One player I didn't talk about on the 15 transactions episode this week was Emanuel Wilson. He got more run in week 3, partially due to game script, partially due to offensive environment, and partially to give Josh Jacobs a little bit of a rest. Wilson hit a 41% running back rush share and a 10.5% target share, though. And even though he's not a household name, he's kind of looked the part. According to Next Gen Stats, Wilson's rushing yards over expected per rush is just 0.2 yards away from Josh Jacobs' number. They're both in the top 20 in the league, by the way. Wilson has an absurd 57% success rate. Josh Jacobs is at 32%. Now, I'm not saying that he's better than Jacobs, because he's not. But he might be a better handcuff than people realize with Marshawn Lloyd sidelined. The Anthony Richardson experience has not been fun, and it's for 2 reasons. First, he's just not throwing the ball well. Richardson is currently last in the league in completion percentage over expected. That's not surprising to anyone who's watched him this year. He's missed some really, really easy throws. He'll make some crazy ones, but he's been wildly inaccurate. Now, that would be fine if the rushing production was there, at least from a fantasy perspective, but it hasn't been there. Richardson only has 6 scrambles on the season according to PFF. For reference, Jaden Daniels has 17. Lamar Jackson has 12. Josh Allen has 10. All the while, Richardson has 18 rush attempts. That's 20 fewer than Jaden Daniels, and it's 17 fewer than Lamar Jackson. My friend Rich Rebar at Lord Reeves on Twitter, he tweeted, Richardson's 7.3% scramble rate when pressured is 28th in the NFL since last season. He has a lower scramble rate per pressure to start this year than Aaron Rodgers and Jared Goff. The Colts need to unleash Anthony Richardson more. And until that happens, we're going to see a roller coaster of results. Now, speaking of the Colts, Josh Downs returned to that lineup in week 3, and it was bad news for A.D. Mitchell. Downs is their primary slot guy. Michael Pittman, he's their strong perimeter receiver. So the final receiver spot opposite of Pittman comes down to Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell. And in week 3, it was Alec Pierce who won out. Pierce saw a season low 11% target share, but he did run 20 routes. That's the same as Michael Pittman. Josh Downs was at 16. Ashton Doolin was at 3. And Adonai Mitchell was at 2. Now that's subject to change each week, but so far, that's bad news for Mitchell. I had J.K. Dobbins as a sell in the 15 transaction show last week, noting that you should only trade him away if you were seeing a big profit on the return. Because the way he was playing versus Gus Edwards, it was obvious who the better running back is. When that's the case, there's always room for more volume. Now, the fear with Dobbins was that the Chargers just don't want to give him a massive workload for obvious reasons. He hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his career. But week 3 was a really good one for him, even if the production didn't match. Dobbins saw an uptick of about 40 percentage points in running back rush share week over week. He had an 83% share. His target share was 15.8%, which is awesome. Now, the Chargers didn't run the ball quite as much as they did in week 2 against Carolina. So that huge running back rush share still resulted in just 15 rushes. But it's a really good sign. If you were able to profit big on Dobbins last week, that's totally fine. You shouldn't feel upset about that. Hopefully you were able to upgrade into one of the top 10 backs. I don't think Dobbins is quite there yet, though my rest of season rankings do like him more than the consensus. But he's now more of a hold or a buy given the week 3 usage. Ignore the production. You have to look at the peripherals. I like Tyrone Tracy as a prospect, at least as a day 3 running back, and the Giants are starting to use him a little bit more. In week 3, Tracy hit a season and career high 23% running back rush share, and he had a 28% snap share. Devin Singletary hasn't been all that bad, but it's a split worth monitoring. The last trend this week is about the Washington Commanders secondary. So far this year, no pass defense has been more advantageous for opposing wide receivers than Washington's. According to my adjusted fantasy points allowed numbers, Washington has allowed opposing team wide receivers to score 15 PPR points per game more than they've scored in other contests. So when a team has faced Washington this year, their wide receivers are scoring 15 more PPR points per game. It's a small sample size, yes. But Washington has now allowed a wide receiver 6, 8, 3, and 2 performance already this season in 3 games. In week 18 of last year, they gave up a wide receiver 2 performance. In week 17, a wide receiver 5 and a wide receiver 13 performance. They've actually surrendered 9 top 15 wide receiver performances over their last 8 games dating back to last year. Marvin Harrison Jr. is next. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you get subscribed to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter @LateRoundQB. And make sure you're following the Late Round Fantasy Football YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@LateRoundFF. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back tomorrow with the weekly Sleeper Show.